everyone. One of the patterns that I'm asked most about is the pattern for the dust cover that's been on my channel now for a couple of years. I made a pattern, a cutting file for the ScanNCut for the end panel, and then this particular piece of fabric here is basically just a rectangle, and this end panel is a free cutting file on my website, applelover53.co.uk. And then I decorated it with rhinestones, which I also cut on the ScanNCut machine. In today's video, I'm going to show you, hopefully, how to make a cover for my ScanNCut SDX2200 Disney. Now, I don't know if this machine is the same size as the other DX models that are on the market, so you'll have to measure yours, but I've created a pattern again for the end panel, which will be available on my website. I chose to cut mine from copy paper, and I'm going to just hand cut this pattern on my fabric, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But if you want to actually get the ScanNCut to cut your template from your fabric, if you're going to use like an iron-on backing, or if you're going to use the high-tack support sheet and cut it as just bare fabric, I've put a draw line in, which is your seam allowance. Then it will cut this outside shape for you, and if you've got the water or air erasable pens, you can draw the 1/4 of an inch sewing line on. It's entirely up to you. So what you're going to need for the project is the end panel, and obviously you need to cut this twice for both ends of your machine. You need a piece of fabric that's 22 inches wide by 22 inches long. Now I have cut mine slightly less in the length. Mine is only 21.5. I've cut it wrong, but it still should be okay. It will just mean that you may have more of a hem to turn up, but if this works out okay at 22 by 21.5, I'll add a note onto the screen of the video to tell you. Now, my ScanNCut machine, as you can see here, has got Disney stickers on the front, which come on this machine as it is. I've not put those on. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do with this one, once I've made the cover, I'm going to cut a Disney shape from the machine in fabric to decorate it. And I may even put the ScanNCut in rhinestones over it, because I've still got the pattern from when I made my cover for my CM machine. So this is a kind of like, it's actually curtain fabric. It's a kind of it's a bit like it's not canvas, but it's kind of a cross between a canvas and a linen. It's thickish. It's thicker than like quilting fabric. And this is the same curtain fabric, but this is navy blue. So what I've done with this one, I've cut a piece that's about 6 inches high. I think it's about 4.5 inches wide. And on the back, I've ironed a piece of the fabric applique sheet that you get with your machine. And if you haven't got any of this, if you didn't get it with your machine, you can actually buy it. And I've cut a piece that's the same size as my fabric, and I've ironed it onto the back. And then basically what you do, you peel away the paper. It's double-sided, and it leaves, if you can see, a shiny, and that's adhesive. So once I've cut my shape out, I can then iron that onto the front of this fabric and then sew round it to keep it in place. So the design I'm going to use, I'm going to come into the patterns, I'm going to come into the Disney section and into the Mickey, and I'm going to use this design here. It's DSM104 and it's just like a silhouette of Mickey Mouse, and I'm going to make it 5 inches high. So at 5 inches high, it's 3.31 inches wide. I'm going to say, okay, okay, set, put it on my mat. I'm going to load up my mat with this piece of fabric and then I'm going to cut it. Now, since I've had my SDX machine, I've only been using the low tack mat and I've used it for everything. I've used it for cutting copy paper. I used it for cutting all the cardstock for the Disney project that I posted on my Instagram page recently. And if you've not seen it, I'll just give you a quick look at it now. This is the Disney project I did. It's a variation of my pop-up box, which is also a free cutting file on my website, which I made bigger and taller, and I added a base to make it more like a box. And all this paper is Stampin' Up Designer Series paper, and I cut all this with the machine, and all the card is all Stampin' Up card in various colours. And there's a, you know, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a Donald Duck on the back, then there's one of the princesses, there's Goofy, Tinkerbell, there's the hands, there's Mickey and Minnie, and there's Pluto at the front. And all this was all cut on the low tack mat. So I'm going to peel the backing paper off here and I'm going to stick it onto this mat with the glue side down, so fabric side up. And usually when you stick anything like this kind of double-sided iron-on or heat and bond or anything like that, I've always stuck it to a mat with the glue side down and it generally sticks pretty well. So that's why I'm going to try and use the low tack mat. If it, you know, looks as though it's going to start to move, then I'll stop the machine and I'll put it on my standard mat. But for now, I'm going to try this mat. I'm just going to burnish it down just with the handle of my spatula. I always use this, I don't use anything else. I know some people use a brayer and all that kind of thing, but I just always tend to use the handle. Now, with my ScanNCut SDX Disney machine, I also got a fabric blade, which is meant to be used for thin fabric. This isn't thin fabric, so I'm not going to use it, but also it's got an iron-on on the back. So I would probably, even if it was quilting fabric with an iron-on, I probably wouldn't use the fabric blade. I've not tried it, but to me, when you put an iron on the back, you make something thicker, and it's called a thin fabric blade. So I would probably only use that blade if I was using a fabric that had nothing ironed onto the back and I was using the high-tack adhesive support sheet, you know, onto an old mat and just cutting bare fabric, if you like. So for this project, I'm going to use my regular blade. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into the background scan icon and say start. I'm going to come into the wrench icon and I'm just going to make the background lighter and say OK so that I can see my design, and I'm just going to kind of sit it centrally to the fabric so that there's, you know, extra space all around the edge. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to select cut. I'm going to come into the wrench icon and I'm going to put my cut pressure back to the default, so auto. Now the reason my cut pressure is on -1 is because somebody in one of my groups suggested that if you put it on -1 rather than the default, it might save the mat a bit longer so that the cuts are not as deep into your mat. So about a day after I'd had my machine, I changed my cut pressure to -1, and I've cut everything since on that, and everything has been fine. And as I say, I've only ever used this mat, and it is scored, but all mats will be, but it's not heavily scored. But because I'm using a thicker fabric with an iron on, I'm just going to put the cut pressure back to the default and see what happens. So I'm going to say OK and start. If I think that this is not going to look right, I'm going to hit the pause. And you can hear the blade going through the fabric. As I say, it is a, quite a heavy weave fabric. Okay, that's finished, but what I'm going to do before I unload it, I'm just going to lift a corner and see whether it's cut or whether it needs cutting again. And as you can see, that looks as though it's cut perfectly. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to unload the mat. So I'm just going to gently remove the fabric, and as you can see, I'm left with a perfect Mickey cutout. Now I'm just going to bend the mat to start to release him from the mat, and I'll move the mat out of the way, and there he is, absolutely perfectly cut. And as I say, I'm not sure how well you're going to see this, but this is a thick fabric. This is not, your ordinary quilting fabric. So that cut beautifully. Even his tail, how thin his tail is on the end. So that's my iron-on that is hopefully going to go onto the front of this cover. Okay, because these measurements are so close, I've marked the 21.5 inch with an air erasable pen at the top, and then I've got the 22.5 inches is the width. I'm just going to fold the fabric in half, and I'm going to finger press the top of each side just to make a mark. Now I'm going to bring in my end panels, and taking the first end panel, I'm going to fold these in half, line up the bottom corners, which are now straight, and finger press in the middle at the top. So this mark I've just made here is now going to line up with the center of this piece of rectangular fabric. I'm just going to put the two together and pin . Okay, so that's all pinned now, and then I'm going to sew all the way around it, but first I'm going to do exactly the same on the other corner, and then it will be ready to sew. So this is what it looks like now it's all pinned together, and then I'm just going to bring the machine in and start to sew it. Okay, so I'm just making sure that the bottom of the side panel and the bottom of the rectangle are lined up together, and I'm just going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and remove the pins as I go. And I'm sorry about the glare from my sewing machine. Okay, so that's the first side done, and I was just checking that all the seams and everything were okay. So now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to repeat with the other end panel. Okay, so I'm just getting near to the end of this second panel, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this over to my overlocker and overlock around both end panels. If you don't have an overlocker, you could use a zigzag stitch on your machine, or as it's going to be inside, you're probably not going to see it anyway, so you could probably leave it. In the last part of the video, I'd got up to where I'd sewn the end panels on and I'd said that I was going to overlock the seams. So that's all I've done so far. You saw me sew these on, and then I literally took it to my overlocker or serger and just went round. And you will have to ease these bends in a little bit. You know, you might get a little bit of puckering when you get them in, but I think when I press this, hopefully that will be okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to give it a quick iron, and then I'm going to put on my little applique Mickey Mouse, and I'll probably apply the rhinestone design which I cut several years ago when I made my dust cover for the CM model. My Mickey Mouse in place, and because it's got heat and bond on the back from when I cut it, I'm literally just going to bond it onto the fabric. I'm not going to bother sewing it. It's a ScanNCut dust cover. It's not likely to be going in and out of the wash all the time, and it should stay because this is heat and bond extra, I think it's called, not the light anyway. So I'm just going to hit this with a dry iron and hopefully bond it into place. I'm going to get a piece of fabric just to put over it, just using this as like a pressing cloth. That seems to be bonded fine. So when I did my other dust cover, I made this rhinestone template, so I can use this again now to put on here. So I'm going to peel the backing off here. Put this onto my board. So it's the SS10s that I used for this design. And I'm just going to brush them into place. It's a bit fiddly, this bit with the rhinestones. But if you take your time, they will drop into the spaces. But if you've got the SDX model, the Disney model in the UK, you get a trial rhinestone kit that looks like this. So you wouldn't be able to do this ScanNCut, but you'd be able to do rhinestone patterns that are already in the machine for you. To be able to make your own like this, you need the full rhinestone kit that has an activation card, and then you'd get access to ScanNCut Canvas, which is where I made this. And this is a video on my channel from several years ago, and I will try and remember to add a link to it underneath this video. So I'm just going to scoop away the excess rhinestones, and then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pick up with this tool that you get and just put them into the spaces where I've not been able to catch with the machine. Now that one's upside down, so I'm going to take that one out. So you just make sure that the rhinestone is shiny side up, and then you can pick it up with this and just drop them into your... That one's gone in upside down, so I'll get another one. So I think I've got them all there now, so I'm just going to move these out of the way for a minute. Find a piece of transfer tape that's big enough. Down, just making sure that I've got all the rhinestones in all the holes before I put this down. And then I'm just going to put that straight over the top and press it down. And I'm just going to leave that there for a minute, and I'm going to bring in, this is a little tray that came with another cutting machine from years ago. I'm just going to bring that in and dump these all in here. And because it's got like a little funnel on the end, this should hopefully all go back into the bag without going all over the floor. So now I should be able to lift up this transfer sheet and bring all the rhinestones so I can get rid of that now, and then this can now go on here. And I'm just going to do this by eye. I'm not too precious about it. As I say, it's just, you know, a dust cover for the machine at the end of the day. So that's just going to bring in this piece of scrap fabric again, and then hold the iron over here. Now you do need to apply some pressure, and if you can work on a hard surface, I found that that's better. This ironing board has a bit of give in it because it's on legs, but you know, just work your way along. Don't do too much rubbing backwards and forwards. I can actually see the rhinestones through this fabric. So I'm just going to keep applying the heat on this, and then wait till it cools and peel it away, and I'll show you how it's looking. I can see that this is peeling away now and all the rhinestones are being left behind, but I'm holding on to it on the edges just in case there are any stray ones that, you know, don't want to adhere down. I think I've got them all. Just make sure I've got this last one. Yeah, so that's come away cleanly now. So that can go back on its protective sheet, and that can be used again. You can get several uses out of these transfer sheets. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to cover it back up again, and I'm just going to hit it one more time. And then what you can do is turn it over and hit it from the back side. So that is how it's looking. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not going to do this on camera, but I'll show you at the end. I'm just going to turn it in about 1/2 inch all the way round and just top stitch it with my sewing machine. And then when I've done that and I've given it a good overall press, I'll come back and show you how it looks. Okay, so here it is finished. I've turned up the hem about 1/2 inch, top stitched it all the way around and give it a bit of an iron. And as you can see, it fits perfectly. So the end panel pattern is available for free on my Apple Lover 53 website. I cut out the end panel pattern using the ScanNCut machine, but then I put the pattern onto the fabric and cut that out by hand. If you do want to cut your end panels in fabric on your machine, then I would suggest you use the high-tack support sheet applied onto one of your mats. And I've included a draw line for your seam allowance. It's up to you, you can do it either way. It's a fairly simple pattern to cut out by hand, to be fair, but I would use your machine to cut the pattern out. That makes that bit easier for you. So there it is finished. So I've got matching dust covers now, only this one's got Mickey Mouse on it, obviously because this is the SDX2200 Disney model. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.